Lacquerware is one of the most interesting areas of Japanese art and antiques. Basically, the lacquer is made from the sap of a tree that's related to poison ivy and poison sumac, and when the sap is raw, it's very poisonous and irritant. But once it's cured in a damp atmosphere, it becomes a hard, plasticky varnish. It's actually a natural plastic, a natural polymer. And they discovered this in Japan more than 6,000 years ago, that you could waterproof baskets and wooden bowls with it. It's used in a lot of Japanese household articles, soup bowls, sake bowls. This is a very interesting piece. This is from the Edo period, but probably about 1850, and it's a ceremonial pourer for sake that was used in a formal occasion, maybe in some samurai home, beautifully decorated with gold on top of the lacquer, and the lid, it's lacquered red inside. This is all made from bent wood, thin strips of wood bent around and then lacquered. It has its own spout cover, and it was used to pour into lacquered sake cups like this. This is a good example of a commemorative cup, not as old as this, but you would pour the sake into this, and they can range in value. This particular one is worth about $400. Some of them are more if they have fancier lacquer or if they're older pieces. And this would be much more common in a Japanese home. This isn't as old. This is probably from the 1940s or 1950s. It's called a jubako, and it's a lunchbox or a picnic box with several layers and a lid. This type of lacquer is called chinkinbori, sunken gold, because it actually has engraved designs with gold dust rubbed into them. And very beautiful. You will see this type of lacquer quite often. It's the sort of thing that does occur in Japanese Canadian homes. Another common thing would be soup bowls. This one came from Japan, but directly, and this is a typical soup bowl with the lid. It's made of turned wood that's lacquered, and the design has a hawk on a pine tree. This would have been used at New Year's time because the hawk has a special lucky symbolism at New Year's. This is probably about 60 or 70 years old. This one around the same age. This one came to a Canadian family who lived in Japan in the 1920s. It's a little bit larger, but also made out of wood turned on a lathe. And the way you can tell these pieces, because the modern lacquer is mostly plastic, sometimes with a thin layer of lacquer, they're very light in comparison with the plastic. Even though this is much thicker, this is heavier, and the sound is different. If I tap this one, it's a sharp sound compared to this one, which has a much lower sound. But if you look too on the older pieces, the lacquer shrinks a little, the wood shrinks a little bit, and you can sometimes see the actual pattern of the wood grain here or inside. Bowls like this can vary greatly in value. You can find lacquered soup bowls sometimes in antique shops for $20 or $30 or $40. If they were very well made, very fancy with beautiful fine gold work on them, they might go for much more than that. But they normally came in sets of 10 or 20, which is 10 is the Japanese dozen. And they were used for serving soup, not every day necessarily, but definitely for special occasions like New Year's. This is another lacquered piece. This is called Negoro lacquer. It's black lacquer with red over it and then rubbed so that the black shows through. It originated in a temple in Japan, but it's made all over. And this is called hakama, which means trousers, and it's a drip catcher for a sake bottle. They would use these to keep the sake from dripping down and spoiling the table or the tatami mats if they were sitting and serving sake to guests. And these hakama are something that you do run across. They're quite beautiful sometimes, and it made in various shapes. This one, if you look at it from the top, is a plum blossom shape, which means long life. This is a type of lacquer called shunkei lacquer, and it's clear lacquer, like varnish, natural lacquer with no color added. And these are wooden coasters that are used for teacups. They use wooden coasters in the wintertime to serve guests, put a porcelain teacup on top of it, and in the summertime they use metal ones. A little serving tray here, probably for sake. This one is quite well worn. It's been used. It's well over 100 years old. It has a design of a camellia flower and a little bird. And it's made from bent wood that's been bent around and lacquered, and then a flat wooden base. But you'll see many, many serving trays like this, or these large trays. This is later. This is from the 1950s. And lacquered cypress wood with a bamboo design in gold. And this is called ozen. It's a formal tray that would be served put before a guest with a formal meal. They'd be seated in the room on the tatami, and this one has the family crest of the owner. This is the crest of a very well-known samurai family. And on it would be your lacquered soup bowls, your chopsticks, and various other dishes that would be served to the guest. This one is thick cypress and bent cypress here. It's not layers of wood, but single pieces with heavy, heavy lacquer. And you can actually see the wood grain here where the lacquer shrunk. You can see the pattern of the wood grain. This is very high quality lacquer. The good lacquer is very thick, and the cheap export lacquer is very, very thin, or the lacquer that was used for every day. One more example, modern lacquer. This is a design, very beautiful design. This is made by a company in Kyoto called Zohiko, and they're very famous for fine lacquerware. But it's a feather, a bird's feather, that's been done in gold lacquer on the surface of the black, and it looks like a real feather. Every little detail is painted in. The Zohiko company specialized in doing feather designs, but many, many other lacquer designs as well. It's a little dish, simple lacquer dish or coaster.